Well, there were no cyber attacks or anything like that over the weekend. The weekend actually was, in some respects, quiet, though there was apparently an awful lot of shelling in the Donbass, shelling by each side against the other. I'm not in the Donbass, so I'm not going to comment as to who was responsible for the greater part of the shelling. But anyway, there was no reports over the weekend of any particular preparations by the Russians to launch a strike on Tuesday. And then quietly we learnt that the day had been postponed to Wednesday, which is of course tomorrow. And this was supposed to be the day that this great invasion was going to begin. Though, as I will discuss shortly, that is now looking, to put it mildly, unlikely. But let's take a step back, and before we discuss all of this, let's start looking at the situation overall. First thing to say is that Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, who I am sure must have come under a great deal of pressure from behind the scenes, did not, as expected by some people, and I suspect as was wanted by some, call off his trips to Kiev and Moscow. And to be very clear, his trip to Kiev was, in my opinion, very much a trip intended to pave the ground for the really important trip, which is, of course, the one that he's making to Moscow. And he's arriving in Moscow today, and he's going to have talks in Moscow with Vladimir Putin, with President Putin. And obviously they're going to discuss Ukraine itself, but they're also going to discuss, the Russians are insisting on it, Russia's quest for legally binding security guarantees, the general state of security in Europe, and of course the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and all those sort of matters. So there's going to be a meeting between Putin and Scholz today in Moscow, which is going to be an important meeting. And of course, we remember from the events of last week, from all the various contacts between Macron and Putin, that the Germans and the French are working in close coordination with each other in trying to settle issues of European security. And clearly there is a French diplomatic initiative underway. I don't think there's any dispute about that. I did a detailed analysis of the press conference between of Putin and Macron, and I passed Macron's extraordinarily interesting points. As I've discussed previously, the French clearly have immense sympathy and understanding, to put it mildly, of the Russian position on reconstituting Europe's security architecture. Indeed, I've no doubt that privately they agree with it, but they're very, very hesitant about moving forward without the support of the Germans, the other key state within the EU. And the Germans at the moment are very reluctant to come out openly and support the French initiatives and support the French positions and move forward with all of these security proposals, because they're worried about what the United States might do with respect to sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which for Germany is a strategic interest. And again, it was notable that whilst Scholz was in Kiev, he again cast cold water on the idea of Ukraine joining NATO. In fact, there were briefings, there were reports that informally German officials were going around telling everybody that Germany was looking for some way to tell the Russians that the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO would be postponed for consideration by at least 10 years, and that this might be some way forward with this issue. The Russians, for their part, by the way, have said that they're not prepared to accept that. They've had verbal assurances about NATO expansion in the past, which were not honoured. It's not going to be enough to satisfy them. They insist on legally binding security guarantees, which will include a commitment to end the eastward expansion of NATO. But at least the Germans are talking about this issue, even though for the moment they're not prepared to make any definite commitment about it. So there is that. And interestingly, whilst he was in Kiev, also Scholz did the same thing that he did in Washington. He refused to refer to Nord Stream 2 by name. He certainly didn't make any commitment to cancel the pipeline as part of any kind of sanctions package in the event of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. He's clearly skeptical about the reports that a Russian invasion of Ukraine is pending. After all, the very fact that he is travelling to Moscow casts doubt on the idea that he believes in any kind of imminent Russian invasion of Ukraine over the next few hours, and he doesn't want to be boxed in to a commitment he doesn't want to make, which might force him and Germany to take action, namely cancelling the Nord Stream 2 pipeline in circumstances which are unclear and when they don't want to make a decision of that sort, of a decision like that. So anyway, Scholz is travelling to Moscow. If all the hysteria of the last few days was intended to dissuade him from going, as I firmly believe was at least in part the case, well, that has failed. He's going to meet with Putin. There's going to be discussions. Quite possibly, some of these discussions are going to take place in private, without interpreters. Putin speaks fluent German and doesn't need interpreters to discuss things with Scholz. And it may be that there will be off-the-record discussions between Scholz and Putin, charting the way forward, which we won't be informed about or know about, probably not at least for many years. Anyway, that's one part of the diplomacy. But of course, there's been other things which have happened as well, because on Monday, Putin met with his two most important foreign policy and security officials. Firstly, he had a meeting with the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, and then he had a meeting with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And it's fascinating to see how the media in the West have discussed the meeting between Putin and Lavrov as being about Ukraine, even though, in fact, Lavrov and Putin discussed Ukraine, mentioned Ukraine, very much incidentally and only in passing. I'm not going to go through the transcript. I'm not going to read out the whole transcript of the meeting between Lavrov and Putin. There's a link which you can follow and which it sets it all out clearly. And this one doesn't really require much debate or discussion. What Putin and Lavrov were talking about was the West's response to Russia's request for legally binding security guarantees. Lavrov reported to Putin that the American and NATO responses were unsatisfactory, that when Lavrov followed up those responses by asking formal questions of all of the member states of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, he didn't get replies. What he got instead was short, apparently extremely brief and cursory comments, written comments back from Josep Borrell, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, and from Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General. And he doesn't accept that these are even replies, and he's pointed out to Putin that when Lavrov, sent these follow-up questions to the OSCE member states, they didn't send them to either Borrell or Stoltenberg. So why are Borrell and Stoltenberg responding? Well, there's a very simple reason, by the way, why they are responding. It's quite clear that NATO and the EU don't trust all the various NATO and EU member states to come up with the right answers as far as NATO and the EU are concerned to Russia's questions. So rather than allow countries like Bulgaria, Croatia, Slovakia, Greece, and all the others to come up with their own answers, the instruction went out from Brussels that please don't reply to these Russian messages, to these Russian questions. We will reply on your behalf. And of course, what then was provided was no real reply at all. We will see whether or not, by the way, these responses are ever published. I understand that they are extremely brief, or at least that's what Lavrov told Putin. And then Putin asked him, is there any point in continuing this discussion with the West? And Lavrov said, well, we prepared our own 10-page reply to the Americans and to NATO, to the original responses that that NATO and the United States sent to our original demands. We're going to send them. And there is still a lot of diplomatic activity going on. We're meeting with all sorts of people, and it's too early yet to pull the plug on these discussions. And perhaps it might be worth just mentioning the point that Lavrov made about the extent of the discussions that are going on. And the question was from Putin, Mr. Lavrov, do you think we still have a chance of coming to terms with our partners on the key problems of our concern? Or is this simply an attempt to drag us into an endless negotiating process with no logical conclusion? And Lavrov's reply was, Mr. President, you have said more than once, you and other representatives of the Russian Federation have said that we are warning that an endless discussion on the issues that must be resolved today is unacceptable. That said, as the head of the foreign ministry, I must say that there is always a chance. I am referring to your recent meetings with the US and French leaders. The Federal Chancellor of Germany is coming tomorrow. Our colleagues are addressing me. The Polish foreign minister will be here tomorrow. It's an interesting development, by the way. The foreign minister of Poland is heading to Moscow. One wonders what he's coming for. The Italian foreign minister will be here in 2 days, and other meetings are being planned. So note, by the way, that he says absolutely nothing about the British. He clearly considers the British to be a complete waste of space after the disaster, the debacle of Liz Truss's visit last week, and the comparable debacle of Ben Wallace, the British Defence Secretary's trip last week, which I've recently discussed in a video which I've done with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou, and which you can find on the Duran, and which will shortly appear on our locals page. The British obviously are too ridiculous to take seriously, but there's ongoing discussions with the Americans, there's ongoing discussions with the French, including with Presidents Biden and Macron. Scholz is on his way, and of course is probably by now well on his way and may even be in Moscow. The Polish foreign minister is coming. The Italian foreign minister is coming. All sorts of people are heading to Moscow to speak to Putin and Lavrov. And Lavrov goes on to say, we have consistently conducted explanatory work. We are committed to explaining why we are right and that we are ready to listen to serious counter-arguments. That said, I think our opportunities are far from exhausted. Of course, they should not be endless, but I think we should still continue to pursue and build on them at this point. And the point to see here is that, yes, the main dialogue is with the Americans, but it's clear that all the major European countries, Germany, France, Italy, Poland are coming to Moscow. They're all wanting to have their say. So clearly something is happening. Things have been rattled around. The box has been rattled. And of course, given that that is so, it would be premature to simply call the plug on all the discussions at the moment. And one of the reasons for this is that, as Lavrov is pointing out, the very fact that the Russians have been making these demands about an end to NATO eastward expansion and all the rest is, in a sense, leading the Western powers to discuss seriously with the Russians Russian proposals which they have been rejecting up to this point. And he makes a point, an actually entirely valid point, that the Americans, over the last couple of weeks, in order to avoid talking about Russia's demands for legally binding security guarantees, but obviously nervous about the situation in and around Ukraine, are in the process of repackaging Russian proposals the Russians have been making until now, and proposals which the United States has ignored, that the United States has been repackaging these proposals and conveying them to the Russians and making them look now as if they were American proposals instead of Russian ones. And this is what Lavrov has to say about this. The first part of the response, basically the Americans have said things which do not suit us. The second part is more constructive to a certain extent. It envisages rather specific measures to address the problems of land-based short and intermediate range missiles after the Americans discarded the corresponding treaty. This is, of course, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. It also contains specific proposals on a range of measures to reduce military risks, confidence-building measures, and military transparency. Interestingly, almost all of the components the Americans included in their response reflect the initiatives that the Russian Federation has been proposing over the past few years. With regard to short and intermediate range missiles, we've been waiting for a response to your address since September 2020, where you proposed agreeing on reciprocal and mutually verifiable moratoriums on the deployment of these types of weapons in Europe. Nobody ever responded. The proposals from our General Staff sent to NATO in 2020 included measures to move military exercises away from the line of contact between Russia and NATO, and to agree on a minimum distance for the rapprochement of military aircraft and warships, as well as a number of other military technical confidence-building measures. These two have been left without attention. As of today, however, we have seen some very specific responses to the initiatives we advanced earlier. The other side is demonstrating a willingness to enter into serious negotiations. It is clear that our initiative on European security, our security guarantees we put forward and are strongly promoting, clearly stating our fundamental interest in this, has given our Western colleagues a shake. This is why they are no longer able to just ignore many of our previous calls. So I would say that we can consider further progress in these areas, but only while maintaining the integrity of our December 2021 initiative, maintaining an integrated approach. This approach is broader than reaching some specific agreements on industry-specific, isolated, secondary aspects of maintaining military security, important though they are. But above all, this approach is about the legal settlement of issues that generally threaten the Euro-Atlantic region. So, translated into simple English, what Lavrov is saying is that the Russians have managed to shake this all up by talking about their demand for legally binding security guarantees, their demand that NATO infrastructure in Eastern Europe be dismantled, their demand that the eastward expansion of NATO be ended, that the Americans and NATO are now coming at last forward with responses to previous Russian initiatives on arms control, on confidence building measures, on all those sort of things that they hadn't wanted to talk about previously. But the Russians are going to insist from now on an integrated approach. They're not prepared to discuss these questions piecemeal. They are only prepared to discuss them as part of an overall package which will result in an agreement, an eventual agreement, providing Russia with the legally binding security guarantees that they are seeking. In other words, the Russians feel that they have wrested back the diplomatic initiative and are making some progress with the Western powers, even though obviously it's nowhere near enough. And at the same time, they have everybody in the West, the Americans, the Germans, the French, the Italians, even the Poles, now dancing attendance on them. They're all heading to Moscow. They're all anxious to talk to Putin and Lavrov, and in some cases to Shoigu as well. And eventually, and in time, presumably after a protracted negotiation, some kind of agreement on a reconstruction of Europe's security architecture will be achieved. The French already seem to be on board with this idea, but if not, then before long the Russians will pull the plug on the negotiations and they will go ahead with their military technical measures, which I've discussed in the past: the deployment of the Poseidon underwater nuclear-powered drone, the Burestvenik or Skyfall nuclear-powered cruise missile. Some reports, by the way, which now suggest that the Skyfall cruise missile might even be hypersonic. Well, I'm not in a position to say whether that is the case or not. But anyway, all these new exotic and very dangerous and very destabilizing weapons, they're all in the pipeline. They're all heading for deployment. The Poseidon submarine drone most certainly is. The Skyfall cruise missile is apparently back undergoing tests, and this will change further the military and security balance in Europe and will enable the Russians to impose extra pressure on the West until the point is finally reached when the Western powers basically give the Russians what they want. So that's the state of the diplomacy from the Russian point of view. Note that this meeting between Lavrov and Putin was not about Ukraine. And then, of course, we get the other meeting, which is the meeting between Putin and his defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. That actually happened earlier. And this is part, by the way, of a very regular series of meetings. Putin and Shoigu speak regularly. Shoigu comes to Putin and discusses the state of various military exercises and how they're progressing. And Shoigu informed Putin that these exercises that have been taking place in the Black Sea with the amphibious warships that have been moving around the Black Sea and in Belarus, they're coming to an end. And his exact words were, these are large-scale exercises that are underway in the Western Military District, involving virtually all fleets, including those in the Barents Sea, the Black Sea, the Baltic Sea, and the Pacific Fleet, military units from virtually all military districts, including the Eastern Military District, the Central Military District, and the Northern Military District are taking part in these exercises. Some of these exercises are nearing completion, and others will end in the near future. And I would like to note that these exercises involve drills against various types of hypothetical enemy attacks in all areas, including those of surface ships, submarines, and of blue water navies. So partly All of these exercises were defensive, including the exercises in Belarus that were the cause, or at least the excuse, for the latest war scare, as I've discussed in my penultimate video. And the exercises in the Black Sea. The Russians have, by the way, made it explicitly clear over the last few days that these were not intended to rehearse a invasion of Ukraine. They were intended to defend, to protect Crimea in the event of its attack. And these exercises are now drawing to a close. The exercises in Belarus are due to end on Sunday. And in the meantime, already we were receiving reports today that some of the troops in Belarus and in Crimea, with the exercises now starting to wind down, are returning to bases. Now, can I just say that this is all entirely routine? The Russian military regularly exercises. These exercises over the years, certainly since Shoigu became defense minister, have been growing larger in scale as the Russian military modernizes and upgrades. And the Russians regularly conduct combined arms exercises. They conducted a huge exercise back in 2020, which rang alarm bells, and they've conducted more exercises like this year. There is absolutely nothing unusual in this, and Shoigu regularly reports to Putin about this, and Shoigu's reports to Putin are regularly covered on Russian state television. They form part of the news. In Russia, the military, as in the United States, is still a major part of everyday life. It's true in Russia, it's true in the United States to a much greater degree than is any longer the case in Europe, by the way. Lots of Russians serve in the military or have connections in the military. Conscription still takes place in Russia, though conscripts don't serve in combat units any longer, but train up either to serve in combat units if they take long-term contracts or are placed in the reserve. Russians, like Americans, have an intimate knowledge of military life, which is simply not the case in Europe any longer. And of course, what the military does is therefore a major matter of interest for Russian families. And of course, they want to learn about what is going on with the exercises. And that's why Shoigu regularly reports to Putin about them and about why these reports appear on Russian national television. There's absolutely nothing unusual or original about this. This is entirely commonplace. And while I'm on the topic, I should say that Shoigu also reported to Putin about the incident with the submarine in the Far East. He said during the Pacific Fleet's operations, as part of an exercise near the Kuril island of Urup, we detected a submarine, presumably that of the United States. Following almost 3-hour operations, the submarine was expelled from the territory of the Russian Federation. Actually, it had ventured over 4 kilometers into Russian territorial waters, a large distance by local standards. We conducted special operations 3 times and forced the submarine to leave Russian territorial waters. Such activity in the East is absolutely incomprehensible and unjustified, but I want to repeat once again, that the exercises will proceed. Some of them are over, others are nearing completion, and we still have to accomplish certain tasks with due consideration for the scale of the exercises that were planned and launched on your initiative in December. And then Putin says, okay, thank you very much. It is not unusual, of course, for the United States to spy on Russian exercises, for some of that spying to be extremely intrusive. That was what I suspect happened with the submarine. Again, I think that some of the overheated commentary about this, regarding it as some sort of provocation by the US Navy, is overstated. The Russians detected the submarine, which is an interesting fact in itself, and drove it away, and that isn't unusual with these exercises either. So there we go, and we're getting all these reports today of the Russian troops withdrawing from Belarus and Crimea, though it's clear that the exercises are not yet over. But in case anybody should be under any doubt that Russian resolve remains as firm as always, the Russian ambassador to the EU has given an interview to the Guardian newspaper in Britain, in which he's made it clear once more that Russia will defend its citizens in the Donbass if there is a Ukrainian attack there. That is a clear red line. The Russians have said that clearly, and the ambassador, Mr. Chizov, repeated it again. And just to rub the salt into the wounds, Maria Zakharova, the rather formidable press officer of the Russian Foreign Ministry, has written a fiery commentary about how the exercises, how with the end of the exercises, the entire Western propaganda story about the war scare is collapsing into complete absurdity. Meanwhile, Ukraine itself has also criticized the Western powers. Once again, we've had comments from Alexei Danilov, Ukraine's senior defense spokesman, saying that the situation is absolutely under control. And as of today, we do not see that a large-scale attack by the Russian Federation can take place either on the 16th or on the 17th. We do not see that. So there we are. A war scare based on nothing, on routine exercises. There's never been any kind of threat. The Russians have repeatedly denied that any sort of threat to Ukraine, any threat of invasion is taking place. I am going to say straight away that whatever attempt is going to be made to spin this affair, this looks like a debacle. The United States and all the Western powers have pulled out their diplomats from Kiev. They've told all their people to leave Ukraine, all in the face of a war scare that has no reality. The Ukrainians have been told in the clearest terms that if there ever is a crisis with Russia, the West will abandon them. And that is the net result of this affair. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. I look forward to you joining me again in future programs, both on this channel and on the Duran. As I said, remember to look us up on Rumble and on Locals and on our various other channels. Check out our shop, where we have various amazing offers for magic mugs and bomber jackets. You can also support us via Patreon and Subscribestar. And of course, if you like the video, please remember to press the like button, and please also remember to check your subscription to this channel. Thank you for joining me again today. I look forward to you joining me again soon, and have a very good day until then.